It's time to take a seat. We're going to start the session now. Welcome to all of you in the room, and welcome to everyone who's watching online as well. Thanks to this hybrid format, we've got people all over the place watching, so it's good to have you all, whether you're here or at home. This event is led by the Stockholm International Water Institute and convened by the Stockholm Hub on Environment, Climate and Security. Now, CWE's high-level panel on water diplomacy has been a tradition at Water Week since 2018. Partners of the Stockholm Hub on Environment, Climate and Security, the Hub explores the ways in which climate and environment and climate change lead to human insecurities and how they undermine sustainable, just, resilient and peaceful societies. It also explores how adaptation and mitigation can actively build human security and prosperity. The Hub is founded by the Swedish Ministry for Foreign Affairs. It works across sectors and complements the strengths of the four leading Stockholm-based institutes: the Stockholm International Water Institute, of course, CWE, the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, or SIPRI, the Stockholm Environment Institute, SEI, and the Stockholm Resilience Centre, the SRC. The impact of human-induced climate change is already noticeable in weather and climate extremes in every region of the globe today. It's incredibly prescient that we'll be talking about these issues. The issues were also raised in the science report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change in their latest series of physical science and policy reports that have acknowledged the impacts of climate change are already here. This high-level panel on climate and peace, therefore, is a platform for dialogue on the shared risks we face, and also the opportunities for tackling the implications of climate change on human security and insecurity. It aims to strengthen our understanding of the value of water for peace and for development. The high-level panel on climate change and peace will explore how climate and environmental change, including impacts on water, lead to human insecurities and undermine sustainable, just, resilient, and as I said, peaceful societies. Before we start, let me welcome on stage Torgny Holmgren, the Executive Director of CWE.
Thank you, Alok, and most welcome to this high-level panel, both here in Stockholm and you watching online all over the world. Let me start by thanking the Swedish Ministry of Foreign Affairs for arranging not only this panel, but also relaunching the Hub, as Alok just mentioned, with SIPRI, CWE, SRC and SEI. It was relaunched in May this year by Foreign Minister Ann Linde and Minister for Development Cooperation, Matilda Ernkrans. And this is actually the first public event we have since this relaunch of the Hub in May. Now, how can global powers work together to create innovative ways forward to strengthen resilience and human security? I think that is the main focus of this discussion this morning. And how do we understand the value of water for peace and development? Well, I think we all know that shared leadership and cooperation on global climate governance is needed more than ever to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, but also to mitigate and adapt to the climate change that is taking place as we speak. The effects of climate change, and this is the World Water Week we often claim, is manifested through too much, too little water. We had a panel earlier this morning, or a seminar of the Stockholm Water Prize laureates from the most three recent years, discussing about that, also the groundwater effects of what that means for mankind. Well, coming back, well-planned water-related mitigation and adaptation can reduce tensions. I think this is a very key possibility also to bring in the water aspect in the security concern. But it's also mitigate conflict risk and also contribute positively to peace building. Fostering an understanding of the water and the value of water can be an entry point for strengthening peace. That is our experience, and also I think a number of research institutes around the world also come to that conclusion. But also advancing the capacity to manage and mitigate security risks posed by environmental degradation and climate change. So with these few words of introduction, I will now like to introduce the first opening speaker of this morning, and that is State Secretary Magnus Olsson from the Ministry for Foreign Affairs here in Stockholm. And your area of responsibility is quite broad. It's about feminist foreign policy, a drive for democracy, climate and security, human rights, disarmament, and a number of regional aspects. So please come to the floor, and the floor is yours. State Secretary Magnus Nilsson.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, very glad to see all of you here today for this important Water Week. I would like to start today by a quote from the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, who said, "Climate change is a direct threat in itself and a multiplier of many other threats, from poverty to displacement to conflict." Climate change is the greatest challenge of our time, and its impacts are being felt around the world within many sensitive areas, including water, ecosystems, the environment, health, agriculture, food security, and peace and security. We heard from the earlier discussions on the need to connect the dots, in which I agree to, also on the political side. We now stand at a crossroad. Humanity is at a great risk today because of climate change and environmental degradation. These human-made global transformations are not only destroying our natural habitat and our living conditions, they also risk pitting us against each other in a fight for survival. Many of the greatest risks are water-related, and as we see climate change picking up speed, these risks may do so as well. We see glaciers melting away that millions of people are dependent on for water, sea level rise resulting in saltwater intrusion, destroying much needed fertile land, changing weather patterns leading to recurring and persistent drought and expanding deserts. We see the Arctic ice melting, opening for competition over not yet exploited natural resources in the oceans. We see the bleaching of coral reefs that host such abundance of life supporting human life, the disappearance of mangrove forests that are perfect for protecting the coasts from harsh weather. Solid scientific evidence shows that these changes brought on by climate change introduces new complex risks and uncertainties in the global system. This will affect geopolitics, international security, and potentially also give rise to conflict. Failing harvest, loss of livelihoods, and lack of access to natural resources, not least water, risks hunger and forced displacement, creating avenues for violent extremist groups, and competition between groups and also states. But in this gloomy description, I would like to add another quote, this time from Sweden's late Prime Minister Olof Palme, who was also speaking at the first UN Environment Conference in 1972, who said, "Society is the doing of mankind. If something is wrong with it, it can be changed." And we know that man-made climate change also means man-made solutions. Therefore, we must act, and we are doing so. The Swedish government in 2018, together with 4 world-leading research organizations, launched a Stockholm hub on environment, climate, and security. And I'm very happy to be here today in this event organized by this organization and by this hub. So thank you very much for that. The very same year, Sweden, during our tenure in the UN Security Council, initiated the UN Climate Security Mechanism. We have also raised the issue of climate security during our OSCE presidency and have appointed what I believe is the world's first ambassador for climate and security. Cooperation around water is a promising path to lower tensions in the world, and historically, violent conflicts over water is rare. In fact, many water-sharing agreements have robustly survived even world wars, And this goes to show how important a strong bilateral or multilateral cooperation can be. I would like to mention one such promising cooperation in the Middle East. Jordan, Israel, and Gaza exchange solar energy and desalinated water in a mutually beneficial agreement. The European Council conclusion on water diplomacy also underlines the EU's intention to enhance its diplomatic engagement on water as a tool for peace, security, and stability. Earlier this year, the Center of Humanitarian Dialogue brokered a peace agreement on the sharing of freshwater fish ponds and farmland between over 20 clans in north-central Nigeria, thus ending decades of intercommunal violence. The agreement covers free movement and allows for the safe return of thousands of displaced people. And these are just a couple of examples of how bilateral and multilateral cooperation can create safe ways to sharing our limited natural resources, a path which must be elaborated. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, climate change and environmental degradation carry with them new and complex risks for peace and security. We need to take action to handle this. And I very much look forward to listening and learning from this important discussion today. And I can assure you that the Swedish government stand ready to support this work, this hub's work, and the work for peace, security, and a functioning climate system. I thank you for listening.
Thanks a lot, State Secretary Magnus Nilsson. Now it gives me great pleasure to introduce the next speaker in this opening part of our high-level panel this morning, Per Olsson-Frid. Per Olsson-Frid is Director General at the Folke Bernadotte Academy since April this year. Before that, you served as a Minister for International Development Cooperation in the Swedish government, and you have also served as State Secretary for International Development Cooperation, for Democratic Development, Civic Engagement, Human Rights, Media Policy, and Culture and the Arts. Please, Per, you have the floor.
Distinguished members of the panel and ladies and gentlemen, friends and colleagues, it's truly an honor to stand here. I would like to thank SIWI for inviting me and giving me this opportunity to contribute to the opening of this important high-level panel on climate and peace. So, my name is Per Olsson-Frid, Director General of the Folke Bernadotte Academy, a Swedish national agency for peace, security, and development. We support peace-building processes around the world and international peace and security operations as instructed by the Swedish government. Friends, in Serbia, the remains of a warship used by the Nazis during the Second World War are again visible in the Danube River. The drought, called the worst in Europe in 500 years, has exposed this wreckage, which rests on the bottom of the river. And as Europe's rivers run dry this summer, in this summer's devastating drought, other historic remains also come up to the surface. Hunger stones are revealed. Hunger stones, and perhaps you know, but they are historic landmarks, engraved stone blocks made during historic droughts that warn future generations of the famine and the hardship likely to follow each time they become visible. And in the Elbe River, in the northern Czech town of Děčín, close to the German border, a rock has now become visible as the river dries up. And the inscription says, "If you see me, then weep." In Afghanistan, drought has worsened an already difficult humanitarian situation for several years and has interplayed with the other negative developments in the country. And since it's now been a year since the Taliban regained power, as the eastern parts of the country are now hit by floods, with both casualties and destroyed infrastructure as a consequence. We now have 6 million children and adults that are still on the brink of starvation. And in Pakistan, next door, just this week, flooding put a third of the country underwater, affecting 33 million people. And Secretary General Antonio Guterres just calling it a monsoon on steroids. In Sudan, this summer's flooding destroyed close to 15,000 homes, as far as we know. And the masses of water also risks causing diseases to start spreading, and this is in a country without a health system. The Horn of Africa experiences the 4th consecutive year with drought. A record number of people, here too, are on the brink of starvation. In the Middle East, in Iraq, this summer they experienced 52 degrees Celsius. It's no longer referred as a heat wave, but as killer heat. So historic droughts, flooding, killer heat. This is on top of a world that is experiencing expanding and prolonged armed conflicts and increased tension on all continents. It's a world that never got the chance to recover after the COVID-19 pandemic. And these are just a few examples, all of which we have to learn to manage and mitigate. Extreme weather does not just expose us to the remains of the past, they come with a telling of tomorrow. These extreme weathers will be the new normal in the 1.5 degree world. And if we don't manage to come together, work together, and make 1.5 real, if we fail that promise and reach 2.5, maybe 3.5 degrees, things will get far worse. And the relation between climate change and conflict, between climate and peace, is evident. Just the fact that the majority of UN peacekeeping personnel are operating in countries worst hit by climate change give us a hint. The effects of climate change can aggravate and prolong conflicts and make it harder to reach and to sustain peace. But it's not just the direct effects of climate change. It is as much about the ripples. Climate change impacts millions of people across the world, creating more volatile food prices, energy crisis, increasing competition of natural resources, making livelihoods less secure. And this in turn can contribute to more conflict and fragility when interacting with other well-established drivers of conflict, such as inequality and marginalization. Climate change is already threatening to reverse decades of economic growth and development gains that we have achieved. We're back, square one. However, as climate change can shape conflict dynamics, it should also be noted that any future peace will play out in a changing climate. And as climate change affects many risks, there are also opportunities for peace. If policymakers want their peacemaking, peacekeeping, and peace-building plans and strategies to be truly sustainable, they need to factor in climate change impacts at all policy stages. Early warning and assessments, planning and financing, implementation of mediation, and peace support operations. And if done right, this can lay a foundation for new transboundary cooperation and dialogue and help sustain peace and security. To us, at Folke Bernadotte Academy, this means that practically every context in the world where we are involved, climate change is a factor. And let me share 3 observations that we see. We see that climate change needs to be addressed and seen as an integral part in policy and analysis of conflict prevention and peace-building processes. We and the larger peace-building community cannot limit responses to the risks of yesterday, but rather to those of tomorrow. We must train, support, and advise in this direction. 2, climate-related risks to peace and security need to be connected and understood in relation to local contexts. Resilience exists among people and communities. However, the ripples of extreme weather travels globally across borders. And given this complex connection between climate, peace, and security, we need to keep expanding our expertise and knowledge to be able to mainstream this topic into our processes. And 3, we need to build new partnerships. We see that we will need to learn and address climate and security challenges in cooperation with others, with local partners and relevant agencies in Sweden and worldwide. And the UN Climate and Security Mechanism, which brings together UN agencies and the Secretariat, constitutes important progress to that end, with a view to improve early warning system and promote integrated climate security risks assessments. And FBA are proud to support them and their work. If policymakers keep climate security high on the political agenda, actors like FBA and others, with our partners, can work to translate this policy into core operation. And this is needed right now. The world needs to see investments in conflict prevention, mediation, and peace processes, as well as to climate adaptation, mitigation, to climate change. And as these challenges, as I've tried to outline, are more and more interlinked, mutually reinforcing, our solutions must be too. And this, friends and colleagues, this is on our hands. I wish you a successful panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you both to our speakers, Magnus Nielsen and Per Olsen Frid, for the introductory remarks. Now, I'll introduce our first keynote speaker, Mr. Jiří Kozák. He's the Deputy Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Czech Republic and represents also the Presidency of the Council of the European Union. Please come on stage, Mr. Kozák. Let me pose a question for you for your keynote. In recent months, the world, including the EU, has seen how important energy security and climate-smart solutions are for peace and stability. So tell us what role the EU will play to encourage cooperation and collective action when it comes to resilience against climate and water issues. Please.
I'll be happy to. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, excellencies. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting the Czech EU presidency to this event to discuss the important topic of security implications of climate change. The evidence is clear. According to the recent IPCC assessment on impact of climate change, approximately 3.3 to 3.6 billion people live in contexts that are highly vulnerable to climate change. Extreme weather and climate events have exposed millions of people to acute food insecurity and reduced water security, hindering the efforts to meet sustainable development goals. Climate change is contributing to humanitarian crisis and is increasingly driving instability and forced displacement. Recently, the brutal Russian aggression against Ukraine has significantly deepened these problems. It has caused a huge humanitarian crisis in Europe, as well as energy and food crisis on a global scale. All this jeopardizes the effort for climate protection. In 2007, first ever debate on the impact of climate change on peace and security was held in the United Nations Security Council based on the initiative of United Kingdom. Same year, the European Council initiated the first joint EU report on the impact of climate change on the international security. And now, the climate diplomacy is one of the key topics of the European Union. It is built on 3 major pillars: multilateralism, development cooperation, and climate security. Those pillars are not separable, and we have to make the effort to integrate them even further. The EU welcomes the recently adopted United Nations resolution acknowledging the universal human right to clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. European Union is interested in the successful outcomes of both the UN Climate Conference COP27 as well as the United Nations Water Conference next year. Progress on building climate resilience, adaptation agenda, and agenda of loss and damage should be one of the major topics of the COP conference. Generally, The countries that have historically contributed least to the global emission budget suffer most by the adverse impact of climate change. Some climate-vulnerable countries face climate-induced conflicts. The existence of other countries, such as small island developing states, is threatened. The European Union, as well as Czechia in its national capacity, deeply regret that the United Nations draft resolution on climate and security was vetoed last December. The EU is the biggest provider of official development assistance and the biggest provider of climate finance. The whole third of all climate finance is provided by the European Union and its member states, and the share on mitigation and adaptation is quite balanced. Moreover, at least 30% of EU multi-annual financial framework 2021-2027 budget has to be allocated to climate action, including for the purposes of the EU development cooperation. However, it is clear that no country can save the climate alone. Even the European Union, with its ambitious activities such as Fit for 55 or a Repower EU plan, cannot save the climate alone, as it emits only less than 10% of global emissions. We have to find solutions together, and it is vital that the biggest polluters become an active part of this process. Czechia holds the climate security high on its EU presidency agenda. In our approach, it is a paramount task to integrate climate security nexus in all development and humanitarian undertakings to see the real change on the ground. We strongly support implementation of the humanitarian, development and peace nexus. During our presidency, we built on the relevant expertise of the OECD in the formulation of the EU development cooperation and humanitarian assistance policies against the backdrop of climate change. Especially policies of more efficient disaster risk reduction in the context of climate change and fragility shall be elaborated. We intend to draft Council conclusions on this subject, highlighting the role of early warning systems, preparedness, anticipated humanitarian action, and participatory work on adoption. It is why we would like to encourage mainstream of DRR-related measures in the framework of national, EU, and global development plans as a major component serving to build climate resilience. Czechia also strongly supports the organization of the 2023 UN Water Conference, which will be a unique opportunity to raise the global attention to an urgent need for action on water-related issues to meet the 2030 agenda. In this context, it is key to strengthen water governance, human rights related to water and sanitation, as well as other related human rights, enhance action across the water, energy, food ecosystem nexus, and the linkage with the climate agenda. We cannot forget the water-related conflicts have also the potential to affect international peace and security. Ladies and gentlemen, we need to communicate and share lessons and successful solutions. Events like Water Week are very important for this, and I wish success to today's discussions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chili Kozag. Our next keynote speaker is Monica Medina, who is the Assistant Secretary of State for the Bureau of Oceans and International Environment and Scientific Affairs at the Department of State in the United States of America. Now, the question for Ms. Medina is, we're facing global pandemics, wars, and already apparent consequences of climate change all around us, including environmental degradation in many parts of the world. In this area, what role will the US play to encourage cooperation and collective action to deal with these existential climate and environmental risks? Welcome.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be a part of this conversation. Thank you to Siwi and to the organizers of this event. It's such an important question. There's really not a more important question that we could be addressing this year at the Stockholm Water Week. And of course, it's in everyone's interest to avoid the worst consequences of climate change and environmental degradation. And we in this room, many of us have been calling for that for a long time. But I'm not sure any of us really expected the extremes that we've seen this year, the shocks and disasters that hit our world, and the previous speakers have really described them so well. But I think I want to emphasize the point that it's not just that they're disasters, it's all the ripple effects of human suffering that are associated with each of these events, and we just cannot afford them. Environmental stresses create these deadly feedback loops that are driving additional risks and further deepening our vulnerabilities and the vulnerabilities of communities. And I heard the speakers this morning at the Water Prize, many of whom were very pessimistic, and I don't want to be that pessimistic. I want to be as optimistic as I can be, but I think the sense of urgency that we need to have right now at this moment could not be greater. In the United States, we have seen these extremes at home, both too much and too little water, in stark contrast. Right now, the United States, our western states, face the worst drought they've had in 1,200 years, and we're scrambling to deal with the water allocation cuts from our mighty Colorado River and the Lake Mead that stores water for millions and millions of Americans is at a 22-year downward trend, its lowest point since it was created. And at the same time, we've seen flood after flood, 5 separate 1,000-year flood events in 2 months. And these are just changing the way we look at the world and at our own country. And we know, as many of the previous speakers have described, the United States is just one of many, many, many countries around the world facing this kind of devastation. And much of it is transboundary. So the challenges that you see here are shared among us. It's not just that a country faces these alone. Things like the water that was polluted in Poland and Germany that caused the terrible fish kills that have been described earlier today, and Pakistan's flooding, and the United Kingdom and its wastewater problems, China facing historic drought, Africa, historic drought. In the face of these events, it seems to me we're still stuck in old thinking. We're stuck in the systems and the assumptions that have led us here, that maintain power or maintain profits. But if we choose the path of status quo, we will continue this kind of environmental devastation, and it will derail our efforts to sustainably manage our shared resources. And we just can't afford this approach any longer. We need to radically change our thinking. And I'm here to tell you that the United States understands that. We understand the national security implications of both climate change and the loss of nature, and we are prioritizing these as top security risks. We also understand that water is a central link to these crises, and that's why the Biden administration has been mitigating and adapting to climate change, has been making those a top priority of both our domestic and our global work. Last year, President Biden launched the President's Emergency Plan for Adaptation and Resilience for helping more than 500 million people around the world to adapt and manage the impacts of climate change. And water and the intersections with the growing climate security threats will be central to this PREPARE program. We have been working to raise the priority of water by launching the first White House action plan on global water security and strengthening our U.S. global water strategy, which we'll release later this year. These strategies make clear that the United States is ready to work with our international partners to begin to reverse the trends that have led us here. will focus on meeting the needs of marginalized and underserved people and those in vulnerable situations. We will also place significant emphasis on leveraging data, research, learning, and innovation for building and sustaining peace and water security. Across our government and around the world, we are actively building partnerships to work collectively towards these objectives. And I want to take a moment to thank all the partners that we work with, from river basin organizations to university researchers, local utility companies, and civil society leaders. Each of them is playing an important role in building a more sustainable and secure future. Just one of these partnerships I'd like to describe, just to give you a sense of the kinds of things we're doing. The Department of State, along with partners in the Mekong Delta, will be hosting the 4th Mekong Research Symposium in January of 2023. This will be an interdisciplinary gathering with as many as 200 attendees from inside and outside government, civil society, scientists, and more. And it will tackle some of the most pressing challenges and opportunities at the interface between science, security, and policy. And in the coming year, I'm committed to ensuring the U.S. will continue to play a leadership role. We'll be raising ambition for water in 2023 and beyond because the threats are accelerating in front of us. And as we look ahead, the future of peace will look different. It will be more fragile. But I am optimistic that if we work together, it can look different too, and that we must bring more robust, more interdisciplinary, and more knowledge, and we must be more knowledgeable about how issues like water and environment and natural security are the bedrock of our national security. I started the summer in Stockholm at Stockholm Plus 50, and it's really a pleasure to be here at the end of it. But what it reminds me is how much the Swedish government has been an instigator all along, 50 years of progress made because of gatherings like this one. So I just want to commend everyone that as the threats we are facing reach new heights, so too must our actions, and the U.S. will be there. I came just before this from the not launched Artemis satellite, but it reminded me again that if we can put a man on the moon or even on Mars, a planet that has no water, then we can do what's needed to solve the water challenges we face here on Earth, the blue planet. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here, and I look forward to the rest of the conversation.
Thank you. Thank you, Miss Monica Medina. Our next keynote speaker is Sharif Assar, who is the Assistant Minister, Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the Arab Republic of Egypt. Now, Egypt, of course, will host the upcoming COP27, where food and water and security, as we've already discussed on this stage, are underlined as important themes. I'd be interested in, Mr. Assar, in how the linkages between food, climate, and human health will be featured in COP27. So do tell us more.
Thank you very much. First, let me thank the organizers for allowing me to be here for the 3rd time in the Stockholm Water Week. It's a real honor and pleasure to be among those distinguished persons attending those meetings and the fruitful discussions we have listened to through the few days. But today we spoke about the water and the half of the glass, full or empty. At least we have some water in the glass. So whatever you see, there is some water. We need to fill the glass. This is what we need to work for. This is what we need to encourage ourselves to have initiatives. And this will, let me read some figures. I heard the previous distinguished speakers speaking about the figures happening around us, but it is serious. It is serious when we see the wave of drought hitting the northern hemisphere in a very serious way. When we look at what's happening in the States, as the lady said, now almost 30% of the cotton crop will be lost. This is considered to be, as you said rightly, one of the most dangerous drought periods in 1,200 years in the States. 1,200 years. This is a real threat. What's happening in Europe is not different. When Spain is losing 40% of its olive oil trees because of the drought, When the Rhine River is losing the level of water, and this push a lot of even transportation, means of transportation to stop because of the low level of water in the Rhine. This does not move away from where I come from. I'm coming from Egypt, and one of the most beautiful cities in Egypt, Alexandria, is threatened to be demolishing, lost. This historic city of Alexandria, built by the great Alexander the Great, is threatened to be demolished because of the high level of the Mediterranean sea waters. This is what we have now. This is what we are facing now. That's why when we listened yesterday from the young generation of the people who spoke on behalf of the coming generation, saying that they are not optimistic at all and they have the depression of climate change, we suggested and we have the initiative of the 2030 agenda, where we need to achieve goals, among them the SDGs 6. If we do not achieve the SDG 6, we will not achieve the Agenda 2030 in totality. We need to work. Yes, we need to achieve all the SDGs, but we need to give priorities to some fields that is imminent threat to us. This is what we are looking at now. How can we use this? We have an opportunity this year. We have the COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, and we have also the UN 2023 Water Conference, where we will revise where do we stand and what action plans we need in order to move ahead, in order to reach Agenda 2030 successfully, to keep and preserve this planet for the coming generations. This is very important for us. So, what will happen in Egypt? We have on the COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, we'll be hosting the COP27. We have a great number of people have shown interest in participating in this event. We have big numbers. Glasgow have witnessed over 30,000 participants. I think Sharm el-Sheikh will be exceeding this number. We have a beautiful city that will be welcoming all of you and encouraging you to come and visit this beautiful city and help us with your initiatives, your ideas, even if not formally, through the informal tracks. What does Egypt have for the COP27? We have some initiatives that we are putting in front of us. The first initiative relates to what we are speaking about now. It's the climate and peace building. For the first time, we are connecting climate with peace building. This is an Egyptian initiative. We are initiating, and we are speaking about this initiative, preparing a concept paper with stakeholders from different parts of the world. And this, for the first time, as I said, will link climate with peace building, how we can link both together to face the climate indeed risks. This is important for us. Peace building, we need to secure and to develop our peace building capacities and abilities in order to face the climate challenges we have. Another initiative that Egypt will be giving is the AWARE initiative, a title AWARE. AWARE is Action for Water Adaptation and Resilience Initiative. This is an initiative where Egypt will present to the COP27, and it will work in Africa especially in order to enhance change of information, capacity building, and investment in water adaptation and water projects. This is an initiative that Egypt will be presenting during the COP27. Another initiative, which is an international one, given by the Secretary General of the United Nations, which is aiming to the, I'm sorry, let me read it carefully, because it is the early warning initiative for covering all people on the universe in 5 years. We need in 5 years to have an early warning system covering every person on this universe. An action plan is on process now with the WMO, and it is directed to Africa, and it will be launched during the COP27 also. Informally, we have a water day among the thematic days in the COP27, and also the adaptation day will include the water issue during the COP27. We have the water pavilion, which will take place also on the margins of the COP27. So all those events, Egypt is preparing in order to put the water on the agenda of the COP27. Again, I would like to welcome you all in Egypt. I would encourage you to come, visit Sharm el-Sheikh, and give us your initiatives and your ideas. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Sharif Essa. Our fourth keynote speaker is Mr. Jamshid Shoizmzoda, who is the First Deputy Minister, the Ministry of Energy and Water Resources in Tajikistan. Please come to the stage. The question for you, Mr. Shoizmzoda, is that Tajikistan plays already an important role in bringing together the global community around water issues as co-host with the government of the Netherlands. But how do we ensure that the value of water is included in international processes?
Thank you very much. I'm not printing my speech because I'm thinking that is my contribution for the climate change using the electronic vision. I'm still fighting with myself because I like read the book in the printed version. But in any case, first of all, of course, I would like to thank to organize for the invitation and this opportunity to have speech in this important event. And what we see 15 years ago, the issues 20, 50 years ago, the issue of the climate change was something looked like a scientific movie. But what we see last 5 years, we see that is a warming process is not stopping. And we, as a mountain country, feeling it every day. We are thinking that natural disasters increasing. My colleagues in previous speech say that the flood is increasing. Not just the quantity of the flood is increasing, the season of the flood is also increasing. We see it every day. We see it, Tajikistan is a neighbor of Afghanistan and Pakistan, and we see what's happening, and it's also reflected to us in this season. That's why it's very important to role of the water in the global agenda. And my colleague also mentioned about the COP27. And for us, it was an honor that we, in the COP26, Tajikistan, first time with our colleagues in the Netherlands and other development partner, create water pavilion in the COP26. Why? Because all climate change process coming through the water. 80% of this changing coming through the water. That's why it's very important. The recently published report of the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change also highlighted of the role of the water resources adaptation and climate change and achieving sustainable of this process. We all know that demand of the water will be increased, but water resource will be never increase. That's why we have just only one way to have efficient using the water problem. Unfortunately, all these problems can create serious barriers to achieving a sustainable development goals. My colleague also mentioned about it. And of course, in different countries, especially in Tajikistan, we are facing with different problems. You know that especially with the glaciers. Last 30 years, Tajikistan lose 1,000 micro and small glaciers. Just imagine the figures. And it's all brings it to the point that we are facing with a different challenging, starting with the social, economical, and of course with the natural disasters. And that's why the climate agenda in my country very important. Unfortunately, my country every year has a losses of the hundreds $100 million of the natural disasters. Just imagine that the world's largest continental glaciers, Fetchinko, located in my country, in our country, has decreased by 16 cubic kilometers. and volume of this 45 square kilometers in area. It means that the process is not stopping, the process is just starting. That's why in this regards, in government, the Republic of Tajikistan has adopted a state program for the study and protection of the glaciers of the period 2013. And what's very important for us, and we also make the decision to adaptation of them to have created the Glaciers Research Center in our National Academy of Science. We also strengthening our effort to this direction in the international level. We recently held a regular meeting of the leaders of the Alliance on Water and Climate. In this context, the action plan was adopted with significant results. At the first meeting, we also have a president, President of Tajikistan, proposed to declare 2025 the International Year of Glacier Protection. They also noted the need to create an international fund for the conservation of the glaciers, which could be mobilized financial resource from various sources to take the necessary action and implement tasks and the direction. You know that in the morning session, some of my colleagues from the World Bank also mentioned that water management is a conflict management. That's why I think the theme of this event is very comfortable. I mean, that's very necessary. Climate and peace, because we're thinking that the next conflicts in the world will be regarding the water resources, will be linked to the water resources. Today, in order to implementation of this initiative, we are working at all levels and hope that will be fully supporting for the international community. The Republic of Tajikistan actively promote water and climate issues in the global agenda. Tajikistan is the initiator of 9 resolutions of UN General Assembly on water issues, including the declaration of the International Decade of Action Water for Sustainable Development, 1928. Our country, together with our friends from the Netherlands, government Netherlands, are chairs of the UN conference in 2023. Currently, Tajikistan also chairs the International Fund of Saving the Aral Sea, which is an initiative of the 5 Central Asia countries. And in all these initiatives and platforms, we consistently promote water and climate issues related to the water. A few months ago, in June 2022, which we held the second Dushanbe Highlight Conference on the International Water Decade, which was attended by serious officials, senior officials, and politics leaders, UN agencies, international organizations, financial institutions, scientific, civil society, and other stakeholders, who for these 3 days discussed ways to stimulate and accelerate action and partnership to achieve the goals of the decade of action of water resources, including those contained in the Global Development Agenda for the period up to 2030. Dushanbe Declaration adopted with the framework of this conference, including the key message to the UN conference on water in 2023, and calls to international community to unite efforts, make new commitments, intensive and accelerate actions, and partnership to achieve the goals set. Dear friends, take this opportunity, I call to the governments of the countries, UN institutions, international organizations, civil society, and all our interested partners to unite to this UN Water Conference 2023 and make the turning point for the whole world. We need action now, we all understand it, but our commitments should be new and should be realized. And I think that in the end of this Water Week, we will have the good opportunity to send some key message to the UN Conference 2023. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Jamshed Shanzoda. That's the end of our keynotes for now. We're going to have some reflections. So please welcome onto stage Mr. Dan Smith, who's the director of CIPRI, and Ms. Hafsa Malim, who's from the Department of Political Affairs in the African Union. Please take a seat, and they will reflect on what we've just heard. Thank you.
So, thank you very much, and I think it has been an extremely rich discussion. So we are, without any further ado, just going to dive into it. Hafsa, what did you think?
No, thank you, Dan. I think the conversations were very enlightening. I think two things stood out for me. Was one, a warning about the encryption on the rock. When you see me, then
weep.
Weep. But then the other is a reminder that we do have global frameworks that are also trying to reinstate hope. And I think the conversation this morning is the glass half empty or half full? So when we discuss the Agenda 2030 and we say there's no development without peace and no peace without development, this is a conversation we had before, then what it tells me is there's some sort of progressive thought in terms of trying to create all these things and bringing all of them together. So that's the first thing that came to my mind, but I don't know about you. What did you think?
Well, I think that this is a really key conversation because, you know, I'm going to do a little bit of advertising. CIPRI brought out this report, Environment of Peace, which brings together the different issues. And what we've found is that actually, and perhaps this is a surprise, in the environmental community, the traction has been much less than we would like. It is really essential that those who have all of this knowledge and all of this understanding and insight on the environment also see what the social and the political ramifications of that and how that leads into conflict risk. So I wanted to just pick up quickly what actually the last keynote speaker said, Deputy Minister Shamzoda, that water management is conflict management. And that's right, because the issues of environment and peace are so closely linked that if you damage the environment, you damage peace, and vice versa. If you damage peace, you damage the environment. We can see this in every armed conflict. But also, it works the other way around. If you enhance peace, you enhance the environment. And likewise, if you enhance the environment, you are enhancing the prospects for peace. And so I think that this conversation is really key. And I think it's not only at the kind of, let's say, the local level or the national level. I think we need to think about it in a geopolitical context as well. So, you know, I mean, the security crisis that we see is not just Ukraine. It's not just Taiwan. It has been unfolding across 10 years. The number of wars has doubled during that period. The number of people killed in war is twice as much in the second decade of this century as the first. The number of refugees has doubled. All of these indicators have been getting so bad. And that is poisoning the atmosphere in which we are trying to achieve unprecedented levels of cooperation to deal with and address an unprecedented problem. Just one last thing which I want to pick out from this is the concept of ABNJ, areas beyond national jurisdiction, which is 2/3 of the ocean or more. And precisely because they are beyond national jurisdiction, it's just one example, it's just to me it's the most vivid one, that you can only look after the oceans through international cooperation. If international cooperation is threatened, whether it's by Taiwan or Ukraine or selfishness or whatever it might be, I mean, by the crisis over Taiwan, the war in Ukraine, by selfishness or whatever it may be, then we're finding it hard to address those core problems.
No, I quite agree. I mean, and just to take you from the point where you've said international cooperation, and you know, bringing it back to the conversation this morning about do we say think globally, act locally, and we said no, it's important to do both. And so the conversations that are emerging today when we talk about, you know, the nexus between climate and peace are two things. One, it's the compounded nature of the threat and the cascading nature of the risks. We've heard a lot of statistics being provided when you talk about the impact of the drought, for example, in the Horn of Africa. Examples are given in other parts of the world as well. What do we learn? It's no longer about how interlinked. It is very obvious that these issues are interlinked. There's a recognition. I mean, data tells us how interlinked they are, and both in terms of, you know, cause and effect. But why is it that our institutions are not necessarily being as responsive or creating policies that are equally linked? I think that's a question. You've seen some traction. I think it's only until 2021 when the Human Rights Council recognized the right to a healthy environment. We're still having this debate in other spaces. At least the development sector perhaps has moved a bit more progressively on this. The security sector, not so much. Quite a bit of fear in terms of trying to securitize the climate agenda, to which then we say, if we do have comprehensive global norms, then they need to be adaptive enough. If the fear is then securitization of a climate agenda, maybe we need to have a conversation on climatizing the peace-building processes. And I think this is what the speaker from Egypt put quite well, the discussion why we need to have a conversation on climate and peace-building, where the linkages, not just in terms of the risks, but in terms of how they can speak together. And one last thing I just want to say was quite well, and I think FBA brought this out in terms of early warning. I think the EU as well spoke to it. When we talk about early warning, and this is now where it sort of feeds in, it's not just early warning, it's about comprehensive, multifaceted early warning. It's making sure that the conflict early warning systems and environmental, so DRR systems, multi-hazard systems can be able to speak to each other to inform policy in a more deliberate manner, I think is what I would say.
Yeah, so I want to come back to the DRR point a little bit later. We've still got a few minutes to do this, but I think the question of linkages is enormously important. One of the things that we learn when we come to a conference like this is how interlinked, the water cycle is with the biosphere, with climate, groundwater, the unseen water, and so on. And then if you go to a discussion on the security side as well, you will also hear a lot about interlinkages. I mean, between the fragile governance, relations between states, trade, rivalries, and so on. And then we're talking further about more interlinkages between these two interlinked spaces. And I think sometimes that we can get carried away with seeing it as being all so complex. And maybe it's because I've been messing around with some of these ideas for a long time, but I don't think they really are. I don't think it's rocket science to understand that if the climate changes, and that along with other factors means there's less water, then it's hard perhaps to be growing food or to be looking after your livestock, and then things happen and people will move. And when that social upheaval happens, depending on how the government and so on react, and depending on factors of political, local culture, you will find that the upheaval leads to risks of instability. And the instability starts to lead to conflict, and some of those conflicts will be violent, and some will really explode. Not all by any means. I don't think it is that complex to understand that there is this causal chain. I don't think it's that difficult to understand that this is not just the environment, and it's not just peace, it's both, right? I don't think it's that difficult to understand that there are different points along that causal chain where you could intervene with different kinds of policies to make things better and ease things out. I think that what's required is that people decide, I am going to think about those interlinkages. And when they think about them, they'll find they're a lot less scary. Before I come back to DRR, you want to throw...
No, I think just one point on the interlinkages, not just in terms of policy, but also recognizing that responses to environmental degradation can also cause problems. Yeah. It's a backdraft argument that's brought out in the Environment for Peace report. So it's about recognizing that we have challenges and we need to be able to be very clear in terms of what joint response means, but also need to be very deliberate about recognizing how to also jointly respond to those as well. So it's the sensitivities in bringing that out. But maybe you want to make a point on DRR, because I wanted to just make a last comment.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to say on this, the backdraft argument, the risks of taking action. The lead co-author who led us through that in the Environment of Peace report uses this expression that when you raise that argument, you become the skunk in the room, right? Because you start saying that actions that are taken to mitigate climate change also bear risks. But I don't want to be skunky about this. We're not arguing that therefore the actions shouldn't be taken. It's just it has to be done right. It has to be done cleverly. It's got to be done with intelligence and analysis. And the thing I was going to say about DRR, which I think was raised by Deputy Minister Kozak, at least that's what my note says anyway. In the DRR community, there's a kind of cliche. You know, recovery happens. It always happens. Why does recovery after a natural disaster happen? Because it must. There's nothing else to do. You recover. You do your best to recover. So why doesn't prevention or readiness happen? Well, because they don't have to. Right? And that is the big change that we have to make. The complex thing is not understanding that these different fields are linked and we need to think about that. The complex thing, the deep thing, is to understand that we need to develop much stronger foresight. We've got to, our underlying thinking about these issues has got to change. And that's also part of what the Environment of Peace report was about.
No, thank you. I think just wanted to conclude with 2 points. I think one is in the formulation of policy when it comes to climate and security. A lot of progress has been made. We have to acknowledge that, but it's not enough. We have seen enough of progress on the political space, the political architecture within, for example, the African Union, which does not seem to shy away. A reference was made to the veto of the UN Security Council resolution. So on the same day that was being vetoed, the African Union was adopting the 9th communique of the Peace and Security Council. Tells you how progressive these issues are on the African continent, but because there's a recognition on the impact it has in trying to actually create peace and sustainability. And because there's that looming recognition in terms of if you do not respond, then there's going to be bigger problems, then it rarely becomes a politicized discussion. And I think that is then the view that we need to sort of go into this. But if I may, I think just 5 key takeaways I think that I would want to emphasize here. And this is very much, again, captured in the Environment for Peace report, is 1, there's a need to address the linked crises with joint solutions, things as we've been saying throughout. 2 is invest in preparedness and resilience. 3, finance peace and not risk. So there needs to be a bit of foresight into this. Deliver a just and peaceful transition, and that needs to be very well curated. Deliberate inclusivity. I mean, we keep hearing youth, we keep hearing gender, we talk about indigenous communities, but to what extent are then their voices married into the systems? And lastly, I think is what we're talking about here, which is research, education, and inform. All our policies need to be very well informed by data-driven analysis. So I think this is my key takeaways, I think, into this discussion on climate and security.
So from a research institute point of view, look, we know enough to act. We need to know more in order to act better. And because the whole set of issues we're dealing with are a wicked problem, as we work on them, the problem will change, and we will keep on needing to know what is happening, monitoring it, looking at the trends and the processes. And of course, from a research institute director's point of view, that really shows the glass is more than half full, because there's a lot of work to do. Thank you very much for your attention, everybody.
Thank you, Dan.
Before you both go, can I ask you one question? Just take a seat before you. I have a question. I have a privileged position here where I can ask something too. Just quickly, I'd like to ask each of you, from what you've heard, what your recommendations are for donors, for people who are funding all these issues and research and solutions and things. Ms. Hassam Ali, maybe you can start. What kind of recommendations are there, takeaways for people like donors?
Well, I think my recommendation is what I've been hitting at, home at since when I came here for the opening session, which is that we do have frameworks. Can we implement them? Let's not try to keep creating new systems. We have enough data in terms of what this speaks to. So I think this is what we talked about cooperation, leveraging the various comparative advantages of the institutions. We need to start speaking with the same voice, with a recognition as to what each entity can do at any point in time.
Okay, and Mr. Smith.
Yeah, so I have 3. The first recommendation is a purely shameless one. Read the Environment of Peace report. The second recommendation is you promised to give $100 billion to climate change adaptation. Do it. Right? That's my second recommendation. And my third one is really that you have to get on top of these issues. You have to understand the importance of working on them all the time. It's an ongoing process. And I would suggest that one way in which that could be done would be if a group of donors would get together and with potential beneficiary governments, probably in the Global South, identify pilot countries to try these kinds of recommendations out. Not pilot projects here and there, not funded for long enough and so on, but a pilot country where you decide to focus some effort both to do and to monitor for a few years and see the best way in which to make these policies work.
Okay, Mr. Smith, Ms. Marlin, thank you both very much. I'll let you go now. Thanks for bearing with my extra question.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. We will have some more reflections now and some closing remarks from Ms. Kitty van der Heijden, who's the Director General for International Cooperation in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the Kingdom of the Netherlands, and also Karin Gades, who is the Chief Operating Officer for SIWI. Welcome.
Shall we just sit? Do you want to stand? Good afternoon. Yes, it is afternoon, everyone. Look, I mean, what can you say after keynote speakers like this and then reflections like we just had? So you guys put us on the spot, right? This really isn't fair. So we're going to try and give you our reflections on what we heard, but also based on our experience where we see some opportunities and probably some challenges. Look, from the perspective where I sit, I've been working on diplomacy and development issues for the better part of 2 decades. I think what we see is that the tide is rising. We can still change it, but all the parameters are going the wrong directions. I think we can be fairly honest about that. In the morning, during the laureate speeches, we heard everything about the planetary boundaries, whether it's oceans, it's soils, it's water, it's climate, it's forest. We're going the wrong direction. I think out of all these biophysical problems, climate by far has been given the most attention. I think with water, we are probably where we were with climate like 2005, just before Copenhagen. Now, who remembers, let's see, your memory, Sichuan Defender, anyone? Sichuan Defender 2008, Barcelona, massive drought in Spain. That was a tanker ship that used to carry chemicals and was then filled with 23 million liters of water, 6 of them every month for the next 3 months, a cargo more precious than the chemicals because Spain was unable to provide drinking water for its citizens. What we're dealing with now is basically nothing new. What we're dealing with now is what we have known by science, by experience, for many years. And so if we do not start dealing with those problems right now, I think what we'll see is that it gets more frequent, more prolonged, more intense, and that will yield not just more human misery and human suffering, but will lead to tensions within and between countries. And I think some of the previous speakers have alluded to that. Now, when people think, how do you deal with these crises? Many people think, oh, money and technology will solve it. You know, I'm a diplomat by profession. I think something else is needed. For one, it's governance. We need much better governance of how we deal with natural resources. Where are the women? Where are the marginalized groups? Where are the youth people? Yes, they come here in an event like yesterday, but they're not mainstreamed into conversations and decisions that will impact on their lives. We heard about cross-sectoral linkages, agriculture, energy. I think we need to talk about how national and local governments talk to each other about water resources and about tensions within countries, because distributional problems will determine whether people will go displaced or whether they stay where their ancestral homes have been. And I think, of course, we need to look at transboundary issues. It's not just transboundary waterways, it's about evaporation, it's about groundwater, it's about so many more issues that we need to talk about. Quite apart from the biophysical problems that were raised in multiple speeches, water, climate, soils, I see much bigger problems. Because if we do not solve these problems, we can't solve the water, the climate, and the soil problems. And one of that is breakdown of trust. I don't know who sees the trust barometer that's published on a regular basis. It's dramatic. It can give you the chills. If you look at the trust between people, the fragmented political landscapes we're facing, the trust between genders, the trust between peoples, ethnicities, and between nations. And I think if we do not deal with that, we cannot solve any of these problems, and therefore we will not be able to deliver global peace. I think in many countries, what I see from a development perspective is a breakdown of trust between the government and its people, between the social contract that we need to create stability. If I look at the Sahel, people see drought, malnutrition, and hunger, and I see that too. But I also see the flip side of that, and that is that young people have no perspective to a dignified life, and that they end up joining terrorist groups because they're not catered for, they're not provided for. That is what we need to do. If we want peace and stability, we need to bring them basic needs, food, water, and basic care. Their future is impacted by what we do or do not do on climate. And I think we need trust at a global level, because in all honesty, I think we are facing a geopolitical tectonic shift at the moment with the Russian aggression in Ukraine. How are we going to deal with that in the context of upcoming absolutely crucial multilateral negotiations and discussions? We have Sharm el-Sheikh coming up. We have biodiversity conversations coming up. We have the UN Water Conference coming up. Are we able to bridge the divide for the future of mankind and for the future of this planet? I don't know that that's going to be easy. The Global Water Conference, my colleague from Tajikistan mentioned that we're very proud to be the co-chair with Tajikistan on this conference. Now, I don't mean to be rude, but I think if I look at the average age in this room, by the time the next UN Water Conference will come, you know, the previous one was almost 50 years ago, you and I will be pushing up the daisies. So what are we going to leave behind? What's going to be the legacy of this conference? Are we able to create the trust and the multilateral collaboration that we require? I'm pretty frustrated that between the linkages between the economy, I would say, the equity issues and the environment, we haven't been able to bridge the divides between development, diplomacy, and defense. And yet I'm hopeful. I don't know who read Le Monde yesterday. Le Monde, the economics paragraph of Le Monde. Economics. I'm an economist by background. Demain, la guerre de l'eau. So finally, we are bridging economics, we are bridging sort of the military and defense things and the biophysical world. We can actually do it. It's beginning, it's much too slow. And the Canadian laureate said, you know, people are inspiring, governments are not. That's a pretty damn thing to say to all the government officials here, but maybe we can change the tide with Sharm el-Sheikh coming up, with the CBD conference, with the water conference. Maybe we can change it to governments are inspiring and people are thriving, because that is what we promised them in 2015. So lots of work from what I heard, and I don't know where it will end, but maybe you have a good perspective on that. I know you.
Thank you, Kitty. And a lot has been said. It's truly an honor, but also a massive challenge to try to sort of wrap this up. And really a difficult mission, because I agree, and I share some of your frustration, Kitty. I think what we've heard today from the panelists, but also from many of the sessions I have attended throughout the week so far, is that climate change and the water crisis it's real. It's not something that is coming. It's not in the future. It's happening now. And it's not only about rising temperatures or heat waves. It's not about droughts or too much or too little water. It ultimately is about fundamental human rights. It's about human security. It's about food security. And it is about the future of humanity. And I think the breadth of the panel discussions and the presentations we heard today really demonstrates that. But when you say that there is, of course, a source of tension, I, glass half full, want to see, of course, that there is a source of cooperation. precisely. You knew I was getting there. And I think this cooperation is really the precondition for human development, for sustainable development, but also very concretely a precondition for peace, which is what we're talking about this morning. And while I think that some natural resources are treated as a finite natural resource, water is not. But increasingly, there is competition around water as a resource. And with increased competition comes increased risk for conflict, tension, and therefore we have, as the minister from Tajikistan said, that water management is conflict management. And I think that is very, very appropriate in today's discussion. Where I share your frustration, Kitty, is I think that it requires behavioral change, and it requires behavioral change now. Let's not wait until COP27. Let's not wait until the UN conference in March 2023. And I guess my takeaway and my question to maybe all of us attending, including myself attending World Water Week, is really what will I do personally, professionally, differently when I wake up tomorrow morning? What will I be thinking differently? How will I act differently if I want to reverse the tide, that, as you were saying? But I think that in order for this behavioral change to also have a true impact and result in reversing the tide, I think it requires an enabling environment that is needed in order for us to manage the resources and have this trust that if we do it right, others will also do it right. Mm-hmm. And for that, I think we need improved democratic practices. I think we need good governance. We need rule of law. We need to know the rules of the game. And we also need genuine, and I can only agree with you here, genuine participation, representation of women, youth, indigenous, all stakeholders that really count and should have a say in this. And for this enabling environment to happen, I think what we need is collaboration and, of course, dialogue across actors, across sectors, across boundaries with all stakeholders. And SIWI is all about that, about facilitating this dialogue and about creating the frameworks for improved governance in the water sector. And I think that's really the only way we can generate and really improve resilience and also human security, which ultimately is the precondition for security without the word human before. So you say there is often a question around money. I actually think there is a real question here. Not so much about making sure that there are available resources, but making sure how these resources are being prioritized. What is actually the resources, the financial resources, including development cooperation assistance, what is that really spent on? How are those budgets created and allocated? And there, I think there is a real discussion. And I'm saying this not from a government perspective, but coming from a civil society organization that tries, not least through gathering everyone here at World Water Week, but that doesn't come for free. And if we are serious about this, I think we need to allocate resources to create this enabling environment, to improve the governance. So that is also something that I think, and also reflecting on, I think it was Sandra Postel this morning who talked about it will be tough, it will require trade-offs, it will require changes in behavior if we want to see the effects and the impacts of these changes. So having said that, and I've heard in all speakers today, and again, also outside of this specific session, the sense of urgency. We need to act. It's time to act. We cannot wait, etc. And I agree. And I think we need to start to really think and see the climate and the water community as a coalition of the willing, and we need to make it happen now. So let's not wait until the next meeting. And in order for this to happen, I think we will need 3 main things. One is political will and political leadership. And that I think we've seen today from the US, from Sweden, from Egypt, from Tajikistan, that is really starting to gain momentum. We are seeing that political will and that political leadership. But that's not going to be enough. We need coordinated action. We need to be efficient and effective in what we do and how we act. And that needs to happen at all levels. At global levels, with the UN and all of the conferences happening. We need to make these much more efficient and effective, but also at regional levels. And we had the person from the African Union also. I mean, these regional bodies are very important, or basin institutions need to become much more effective, etc. But but certainly not least, at the local level, needs to also really have these coordinated actions. There are some nightmarish stories about countries receiving development cooperation assistance and spending 90% of their time receiving delegations and providing reports and audits and writing summaries and what have you, instead of actually making that development cooperation assistance to use to work on these issues of climate change, adaptation, mitigation, water governance, etc., etc. And I think the third thing that will be needed is really that partnership. And I think the World Water Week is, of course, a fantastic opportunity to build further on these partnerships. And today's session is an excellent example of that, where we have countries and stakeholders really from all over the world talking to each other and creating those partnerships. So I think that together with the hub partners, I think we really want to say that we need to join forces, and we as SIWI, we definitely stand ready to play our part in this, and to be a partner, not only to, let's say, push or advocate for water and climate governance agenda, if you want, at all levels, but also to make it happen in practice, in reality, and to really accompany and hold hands in the process of what Dan was also saying, making it happen for real, and making these interlinkages and having these pilots where maybe things can really be tested and implemented for real. So that's what I take away from this. I don't know if...
I think our moderator.
I am finished, and I see there's 1 minute left, so I think the timing is quite perfect,
I have
right?
to say, I don't know if you were looking at the clock, but it was perfect timing. Thank you both very much, Ms. Kitty van der Heyden and Karin Agardis. Thank you so much. Thank you. And thank you all for joining here in person and online. We've reached the end of this high-level panel, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of World Water Week, the couple of days that are left. Thank you to all the speakers, and thank you to the panelists for all your remarks, and thank you to the audience. Thank you very much indeed.